Hello again. Let's dive into chapter 13. Okay, so in this chapter, we are going to go over sex linked traits, sex determination, X linked inheritance and inactivation. We're going to talk about linked genes, recombination frequencies, and chromosomal abnormalities. So first, just a reminder, okay, our autosomal chromosomes are sort of like our body chromosomes, and then we have 22 pairs of, and then we have one pair of sex chromosomes. Okay. So our sex chromosomes help to determine our gender. So males are XY, where females are XX in mammals. Okay. But many of the genes on the X and Y chromosome affect growth and development. And this also affects sex versus gender. And we kind of need to explore what is sex, what is gender. Okay. So the first question would be, what is gender? Okay, or let's start with sex. What is sex? So the definition of sex is based on your chromosomes. For humans, your chromosomes at birth, your predominant circulating hormones, and your genitalia. Okay, so that's what generally determines your sex. Okay, gender is something different. Okay, gender is how we feel, whether we feel like a man or whether we feel like a woman or whether we feel like a queer individual or somewhere in between. Okay, there's a spectrum. Okay, and it's really important to understand that gender and sex are both biologically based. Okay, so if you take a look at this photo, every single person in this photo has XY chromosomes, but they don't look like people with XY chromosomes, right? They look like women. Okay, so the default developmental state in mammals is female. Okay, we'll talk about why in a moment. Okay, please watch this video. I'm not going to watch it or play it during this video lecture, but please watch it. It is an incredible video explaining androgen insensitivity and some of the features and characteristics of a body that is insensitive to androgens. But as you can see, this individual who has complete androgen insensitivity appears as a woman, identifies as a woman, and has undescended testicles and XY chromosomes. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, for the most part, on the whole, your chromosomal sex is going to help determine which gonads you have, and your gonads, testes or ovaries, are going to determine your hormonal sex. Okay, whether you're producing majority androgens or majority estrogens. And then your hormonal sex determines your morphological sex, especially as far as your brain is considered. And then your morphological sex influences your behavioral sex or how you act. Okay? So let's take a look at the spectra of biological sex. Okay? First, let's look at sex chromosomes. So this is the range of sex chromosomes that have been found in human beings over the last century. Okay, we go from XY, XXY, XXYYY, 5 X's, no X's, or 1X, 1X, 3 Y's. Okay, there is not just one sex. There can't be. There are clearly more, even if we're only talking about chromosomes, right? So if anyone tells you there are only 2 sexes, pull up this figure because there are absolutely not. Okay, this is the spectra of chromosomal sex that exists, and it is a spectrum. Sex determining genes, okay, males on the Y chromosome have a gene called the SRY gene, okay, which is going to activate at about 8 weeks during development and turn on testosterone production. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then we have gonads. In very rare cases, there are instances of the presence of both testes and ovaries, but it's incredibly rare. You can have ovaries, testes, or sort of broken down ovaries or broken down testes. In terms of external genitalia, you can have the female genitalia, clitoris, labia, lower third of the vagina. This is why that lower third of the vagina is why if you have XY chromosomes and your body can't see testosterone, you can still have sex because you develop female or as female. And so you do have that lower third of the vagina, so you can be sexually active. For males, external genitalia, we're dealing with the penis and the scrotum. And then in the middle, we have ambiguous genitalia, which we are going to get to and talk about in a moment. Internal organs, for female, we have the upper vagina, the cervix, and the uterus, and the oviducts. Male, we have the prostate, seminal vesicles, vas deferens, epididymis, and there can be a combination. Sex steroid hormones, same thing. You can have a combination, or you can have the more female-heavy estrogen and progestins, or more male-heavy androgens. Secondary sex characteristics for females, that's breast development, usually a higher voice, not necessarily in my case, less and finer body hair and a lower hairline. And men, there is no breast development. You get a deeper voice, more and coarser body hair. Oh, and I'm really sorry to break this to you, but your hairline starts receding. That's how you end up seeing people that are like in their mid-20s bald, because as soon as you hit puberty, that hairline starts heading back. And now, remember, in this, we have not even talked about the brain. This is just the smallest part of the story. Now we have the identity spectrum, okay? So, gender identity, okay, or your sex, okay? You can be female, you can be male, or you can be intersex, like the individuals in that photo and the young woman in that video. In terms of gender identity, this is how we feel. Right? We either feel like a woman, we feel like a man, we feel gender queer, or we feel somewhere in the middle, okay? Expression is different than identity, okay? Expression is your ability to show how you feel, whether you feel like a woman, whether you feel like a man, whether you feel in the middle or androgynous, okay? Which is sort of like a neutral look. And remembering that for many people, okay, they cannot, it is dangerous even within our own country to express their gender identity, okay? We'll talk about some stats in a moment. In terms of sexual orientation, okay, so if you are heterosexual, you are either a male attracted to females or a female attracted to males. If you are bisexual, you are attracted to both males and females only. If you are pansexual, you are attracted to all genders, meaning males, females, people that are gender queer, trans individuals as well. Okay, so pansexual is all genders. Asexual is without sex. And asexual individuals, usually through either neurology or experience, have no desire for sex. However, they do often desire relationships and romance. Hence the romantic orientation. Okay, so people can not want sex, but still want relationships and still want romance, just like you can not want a relationship and still want sex, right? Okay, so let's get to sex development. So when you are developing, your genitals start out as this sort of neutral stage, okay? And you have these genital swellings and folds and this genital tubercle. So if you go down the male route of development, which means at 8 weeks of development, you have a Y chromosome, it turned on, and you are producing testosterone, okay? That means that little genital tubercle is going to turn into the head of the penis. Okay, the genital folds will eventually become the scrotum. Now, if you are an XX female or an XY individual who cannot see testosterone, okay, that genital tubercle is going to turn into the head of the clitoris, and those genital folds are eventually going to form the labia majora and minora, okay, where if we zipped them together, we'd get the scrotum. Okay. And here, for females, exposure to high levels of testosterone, naturally or accidentally, can actually alter this, and it affects brain development. We'll get to brain development in a minute. In terms of um, ambiguous genitalia, so this is an example of an individual who's lacking an enzyme that changes testosterone into another type of androgen, dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. And if you look in this picture, the normative picture here, okay, the lightly shaded regions, so the penis and the scrotum and the prostate are all DHT dependent, so meaning they need DHT in order to develop. And then the seminal vesicle, vas deferens, and epididymis are testosterone dependent. If we look at someone who doesn't have that enzyme to change T to DHT, okay, their genitalia don't become fully masculinized. You end up with what looks like either a very small penis or a very large clitoris, and undescended testicles, and a blind vaginal pouch, which again is why people are able to have sex when they don't develop, when their genitals don't necessarily develop the way they should based on their chromosomes. So, for male sexual differentiation, brain and behavior, testosterone crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then testosterone is turned into estrogen, which saves cells important for social and sexual behavior through the enzyme aromatase. And then the presence of estrogen in the brain builds up nuclei important for social and sexual behavior in males. For females, okay, no testes are producing testosterone. Okay, there is estrogen produced from the mother and the placenta and in the fetus's bloodstream. However, there are special proteins that stop estrogen from going into the brain, okay, because we know that estrogen in the brain masculinizes. Okay, so the absence of estrogen in the brain, in the female brain, is what causes it to become feminized. Kind of neat. Okay. Last but not least, okay, why does this matter? So there are regions of the brain that we think might be related to sexual orientation, for example. And this nucleus is twice as large as in men as it is in women. Okay, so it's sexually dimorphic. And in gay men, this nucleus is similar size to that in women. But these are the results we're looking at. So the results are kind of hard to interpret. But we do know that there are certain nuclei that are different sizes in males and females. And that shifts to the sizes of those nuclei do affect behavior. To tell you a little bit about your own fetal hormonal environment, so kind of to give you an idea of how high of testosterone or estrogen you might have, okay? Your 2D4D ratio, so if you have male normative development, usually has a 2D4D ratio. So your 2D is your second digit, which is your pointer finger. Your 4D is your fourth digit, which is your ring finger. Okay, and in your ratios, if you have the male type ratio, then your ring finger is longer than your pointer finger. Okay, if you have the female type ratio, your pointer finger is either the same length or longer than your ring finger. I have both. So you can kind of get an idea of that, where the androgen receptor is really, really impactful on the length of that fourth digit as compared to that second digit. It's kind of neat. So you can get an idea of that and how cut your jaw is. The more square your jaw, the higher levels of testosterone that you were exposed to in the womb. And then that can have an effect on your physiology, your behavior. So it's kind of fun to think about. Why we're talking about this? Because there's a social impact here. Okay, from a 2015 transgender survey, 33% of those who saw a healthcare provider had at least one negative experience or were verbally harassed or refused treatment because of their gender identity. This is like being colorblind. People that are transgender, their brains are shown to be similar to that of the sex that they identify with. Okay? So this is like this is like someone coming in and saying, I'm colorblind, and someone saying, I don't care, I'm not going to treat you. It's just not right. 23% of people didn't even seek the health care they needed because of fear, and 40% reported attempting suicide, which is nearly 9 times the regular rate in the US. So our LGBTQIA population is in danger, and really specifically our transgender friends are in a lot of danger. And so there's some additional resources and info there to take a look at, and some resources about how to be respectful and supportive of non-binary and trans individuals. Okay, we need to support each other. And again, this is biology. Granted, your gender identity starts at biology and comes back around to it, okay? Because your gender identity is both a product of your genetics, your hormones, your hormonal and fetal environment, and your experience in life. Because every experience in life, whether it's good or bad, changes the structure of your brain. And so as you experience life, the structure of your brain changes, and as such, your gender identity or your sexual orientation can change with it. So, chromosomal determination of sex, okay, the XY system. So, the Y, it's really so this is the X chromosome, okay? There are a lot of genes on the X chromosome, like a lot. And you can have a lot of mutations for genes on the X chromosome. And a lot of the genes on the X chromosome are what are called sex-linked or X-linked, which we'll get to, which it just is passed down through the X chromosome, which is usually a father to daughter, mother to son sort of deal. Y chromosome, little bit less going on. One of the biggest deals on the Y chromosome is the sex determination region, or the SRY gene, and that's the gene that turns on other genes that eventually turn on testosterone production, which then, as we talked about, you now know how and why testosterone masculinizes the brain and body. So, sex-linked traits follow the X chromosome. So again, mostly males get the X from their mother, okay? And the trait is never passed from father to son because fathers are passing their Y chromosomes to sons. There are very few genes or traits on the Y chromosome, and as it is only passed from father to son, clearly females cannot inherit the traits on the Y chromosome. So if we take a look at Queen Victoria and her descendants, okay, we're looking at the royal hemophilia pedigree. So this is the occurrence of hemophilia. So just to familiarize you with what this looks like, okay, we have, if you do not have the disease, you are a blank square. If you are a carrier of the disease, you are a half colored in square. And if you have the disease, your square or circle is colored in. Okay, so we're going to look at Queen Victoria, and we are going to look a little bit at the inheritance of a couple of these genes. Okay, so let's look at Alice and the Duke of Hesse. Okay, so let's draw this out. Okay, so where we have one person is a carrier, okay, and one is unaffected. So the carrier is the XH, X little h, and the unaffected individual is the XHY. Okay, so we're going to do our classic Punnett square, where we drag our XH, X big H down and over. We're going to have an X big H and then an X little h, an X big H Y, and then an X little h Y. Okay, and so what we see is that in this instance, Okay. What ends up happening is that we end up with one affected male, okay, because our female was a carrier and she happened to give him that particular X chromosome. Now, let's look at Leopold and Beatrice. Okay, so Leopold has the disease and Beatrice does not. So Leopold is going to be X little h y, and Beatrice is going to be X big H, okay? And then we're going to, again, pull down and over. So I'm going to pull my big H and X little h down, X big H, X little h, X big H y, X big H y. So in this instance, okay, number 2 here, we produce two female carriers and 2 males without the disease. Okay. Then if we take a look at a carrier female, okay, a carrier female is going to be X big H, X little h, that heterozygote, right? And an affected male. So that's going to be X little h, Y. Now let's do that out. Okay, so I'm going to bring down my X big H, X little h, X little h, X little h, X big H, Y, X little h, Y. So in this instance, okay, this is where we end up passing both from mother to son and father to daughter, okay, where the mother passes on her carrier trait to her son, where he ends up with hemophilia, and then the male passes his only X chromosome on, because he's only got the one, right? And then the female passes on hers as she's a carrier, and that's where we produce a female with the disease. Okay, so what happens when females develop? We know the Y chromosome is huge for male development, but what about the X chromosome? Well, we get, as females, I'm a female, we get 2 X chromosomes, and one of them actually becomes completely inactivated during embryonic development, and it condenses into this little object called a Barr body, and which X becomes a Barr body is random. It's really interesting. In my family, okay, my sister and I both take off after different sides of the family. I am about 90% positive that my mother's X chromosome was activated in me, and that my sister's X chromosome, my father's X chromosome, was activated in my sister, because she looks like his side of the family and has all their traits, and I look like my mom's side of the family and have all their traits. So it's really, really, really interesting, and kind of cool. So linked genes, okay? So each chromosome has hundreds or thousands of genes, and genes on the same chromosome tend to be inherited together, okay? So if genes are neighbors, they are unlikely to be split up by crossing over. If they are further apart, they are more likely to be split up by crossing over. Okay. Okay. And so recombination percentage equates to the distance on the chromosome. So if they're super close together, we're going to have infrequent crossing over. And if they're not close together, we have over 50% chance. Okay, so when we create a genetic map, okay, the farther apart 2 genes are, the higher probability that crossover will occur, given and result in a higher recombination frequency. And a linkage map is a genetic map of the chromosome based on recombination frequencies. Okay, so if we're looking at the genetics of the fruit fly, B is body color, CN is eye color, and VG is wing size. okay? If we look here, we look at CN, okay? It has 17% chance to cross over with either gene on either side of it, right? And a 9.5% chance, or sorry, there's a lower frequency, okay, 9% that CN will cross with B, but a 17% chance that B will cross with VG. Okay, so here, which genes are most closely linked? Okay. It would be the furthest apart. And then which genes probably wouldn't be linked at all? 48 and 57. The gray body and the red eyes, because they're the closest together. Okay. Chromosomal abnormalities can be due to errors of meiosis. Aneuploidy is when you have the incorrect more or less number of chromosomes, and this happens through non-disjunction, or it's called non-disjunction, where chromosomes do not separate properly during meiosis. There can be an alteration of chromosome number, which is, again, non-disjunction. So here we have an error in anaphase 1 or 2 of meiosis, where your homologous sister chromatids don't split, or your sister chromatid doesn't split when it is supposed to, and then you end up with too many chromosomes. Okay, so the result of non-disjunction can be trisomy, where you have 3 copies of a chromosome, or monosomy, where you only have 1 copy of a chromosome. Chromosomal disorders are pretty high frequency in humans. Most embryos are spontaneously aborted. And developmental problems can result from chemical imbalances. So Down syndrome is a result of trisomy 21. Okay, so aneuploidy from non-disjunction in meiosis, and they have 3 copies of chromosome 21. So this affects 1 in 700 children in the U.S., and the frequency of Down syndrome correlates with the age of the mother, meaning the older the mother, the more likely the child is to have Down syndrome. There can be some sex chromosome abnormalities as well, and this is where we see sort of some of those different sex chromosome, where we see the spectra of sex chromosomes, right? So here we have, if you have XXY, you have what's called Klinefelter syndrome. XXX, trisomy X. XYY is Jacob's syndrome in males, and XO is Turner syndrome in females. So these are pretty rare, but they do happen. So there are, last but not least, you do have DNA in your organelles, right? So your mitochondria and chloroplasts carry circular DNA molecules, and they are inherited maternally, because that cytoplasm comes from the egg, because the sperm's little tail with its mitochondria doesn't get inside the egg. So we can trace mitochondrial lineages through maternal inheritance. And there are some mitochondrial diseases that prevent cells from making enough ATP. And usually these types of diseases are very, very serious and sometimes fatal. All right. Thank you for your time and attention. I will see you in chapter 14.